The cruelest lies are the ones spoken by the people we trust the most. The words lingered in the frozen air just as the great bronze doors of Blackwood Hall swung open, revealing the largest gathering the Northern Kingdom had seen in years. Hundreds of wolves filled the towering chamber, their polished boots echoing across the marble floor, while silver banners bearing the royal crest swayed gently beneath rows of glowing lanterns. Every noble, every commander, every elder stood in perfect silence as Alpha King Ethan Blackwood descended the broad staircase toward the ancient throne. His black ceremonial coat rested sharply across his broad shoulders, and the polished silver crown upon his dark hair reflected the flickering light like frozen moonlight. His face revealed nothing, yet the coldness in his steel-gray eyes was enough to quiet every whispered conversation before it could begin. At the center of the chamber, surrounded by royal guards, stood Amelia Carter. She wore a simple pale blue dress beneath a weathered gray traveling cloak, its edges stained by days on the road. Loose strands of her chestnut hair framed a face that looked exhausted but strangely peaceful. Her wrists were not chained. They didn't need to be. Every accusing stare in the room weighed heavier than iron ever could. The whispers spread through the crowd like wind moving through dry leaves. Rejected Omega. Betrayer. Liar. She had once been chosen by destiny itself. Years ago, when the moon goddess revealed their bond, the kingdom celebrated the union between the fearless Alpha King and the quiet Omega whose kindness softened even the hardest hearts. But that future had disappeared beneath rumors, unanswered questions, and a betrayal no one believed could ever be forgiven. Ethan stopped only a few feet away from her. His voice carried effortlessly through the silent hall. Amelia Carter, you abandoned your king. You concealed the truth from your people. By every law of this kingdom, you stand before us as a traitor. A wave of quiet approval rippled through the nobles. Some lowered their heads in satisfaction. Others watched Amelia carefully, waiting for tears, anger, excuses, anything that might confirm the story they had accepted as truth. But she simply looked at Ethan. Her blue eyes held neither hatred nor fear, only sadness. For one brief moment, something flickered behind Ethan's steady expression, a memory he buried before anyone could notice. Amelia had once smiled at him exactly the same way on a quiet autumn afternoon beside Silver Lake, long before suspicion had replaced trust. He pushed the memory away. Do you deny these charges? He asked. Every eye fixed upon her. Amelia slowly lifted her chin. Her voice remained calm, almost gentle. No gasps spread across the hall. Ethan's jaw tightened. Then you accept your sentence? She closed her eyes for only a heartbeat before answering. If protecting this kingdom requires your judgment, then I accept it. Even the elders exchanged uncertain glances. Her answer felt wrong. Too peaceful. Too willing. Ethan searched her face, hoping to find guilt hiding beneath her composure. Instead, he found something he could not understand. Quiet disappointment, as though she mourned not her own fate, but his. The silence stretched until Ethan finally turned away. Amelia Carter, he declared without looking back, from this day forward, you are banished from every territory under my protection. You will no longer carry the name of this kingdom. The guards stepped aside instead of forcing her forward. Amelia bowed respectfully, not to the court, but to Ethan himself. Then, just before she walked toward the towering doors, she paused without turning around. One day, she said softly, when the truth finds you, I only hope it doesn't arrive too late. No one answered. The heavy doors closed behind her, and with them disappeared the woman every soul inside Blackwood Hall believed had betrayed her king. None of them realized they had just watched the only person who had ever truly saved his life. The wind carried the scent of rain through the towering pines as Amelia Carter guided her chestnut mare along the narrow forest trail, her gray cloak pulled tightly around her shoulders against the early autumn chill. 3 months earlier, before whispers of betrayal poisoned the kingdom, she had volunteered to deliver medicine to a remote village near the eastern border, insisting on traveling without the usual royal escort because she believed frightened people welcomed kindness more easily than armed soldiers. Sunset painted the sky with fading shades of amber when the uneasy silence around her suddenly changed. Birds that had been singing only moments before disappeared into the trees, and even the gentle breeze seemed to hold its breath. Amelia slowed her horse, her instincts quietly warning that something was wrong. A faint sound reached her ears. It was not a cry for help, but the soft rustle of someone struggling to breathe. She stepped down from the saddle and followed the sound through the undergrowth until she reached a small clearing hidden beneath towering oaks. There, resting against the base of an old tree, was a man dressed in the dark traveling clothes of an ordinary merchant. His hood concealed most of his face, and his posture suggested exhaustion rather than strength. Anyone passing by might have mistaken him for another weary traveler, but Amelia noticed details others would have ignored. His hands were rough with years of sword training despite the plain clothing. His boots were crafted from leather only royal armorers produced. Most of all, she recognized the silver signet ring partly hidden beneath his glove. Ethan Blackwood had removed the royal crest from the top of the ring whenever he traveled in secret, believing no one would recognize it afterward. Amelia smiled sadly to herself. Even disguised, he remained impossible for her to mistake. She approached slowly, careful not to startle him. Ethan looked up, surprise flashing across his tired features before he quickly buried it beneath caution. His normally commanding voice sounded unusually quiet. "You should leave. This road is not safe." Amelia ignored the warning and instead knelt beside him. His forehead glistened with sweat despite the cool afternoon air, and fatigue clouded his usually sharp eyes. "You have been traveling without rest," she said gently. "You need water." She opened the satchel hanging from her shoulder, poured cool spring water into a wooden cup, and handed it to him. For several seconds, Ethan simply stared at her, studying the stranger whose calm blue eyes showed no fear of him. Finally, he accepted the cup. "Thank you," he said, his voice softer than she had ever heard it. Amelia offered him fresh bread, dried apples, and herbs gathered from the mountain trails. As he slowly regained his strength, they spoke only as two travelers sharing the quiet of the forest. He never revealed his name, and she pretended not to recognize him. Before long, distant hoofbeats echoed through the trees. Ethan immediately stood, every trace of exhaustion replaced by alert determination. His expression changed, not with panic, but with concern. "You need to leave now," he said firmly. "Ride west, and do not look back." Amelia glanced toward the approaching sound, then back at the man standing before her. Something in his eyes told her this journey had never been as simple as a royal inspection. Without another word, she nodded, mounted her horse, and disappeared among the trees. Hidden behind the thick forest, she quietly reined in her mare instead of continuing home. Her heart whispered a truth her mind could not ignore. Ethan Blackwood was not being followed by chance. Someone knew exactly where the Alpha King was, and if she rode away now, the danger waiting for him would arrive long before anyone else could. Amelia remained hidden behind a cluster of towering evergreens, her mare standing perfectly still, as if she too understood that silence had become their greatest ally. The fading sunlight filtered through the branches, painting shifting patterns across the forest floor, while the distant sound of approaching riders grew steadily louder. Within moments, cloaked figures emerged from the eastern trail. They did not search the road as ordinary travelers would. Instead, they moved with quiet purpose, following a route only someone expecting Ethan's location could have known. Amelia's pulse quickened. This was no coincidence. Someone had revealed the Alpha King's secret journey. She watched as Ethan stepped calmly into the clearing, no longer pretending to be an ordinary merchant. His posture straightened, and the quiet confidence that defined the ruler of the Northern Kingdom returned instantly. The strangers slowed their horses. For several tense seconds, no one spoke. Then one rider respectfully lowered his head and offered a sealed message bearing the royal crest. Ethan accepted it without suspicion, thanked the messenger, and turned slightly toward the fading light to read the letter. Amelia's heart tightened. The seal looked genuine, but something felt terribly wrong. Earlier that morning, she had personally organized the king's travel schedule before leaving the capital. No official courier should have known where Ethan was today. Yet somehow this messenger had arrived at the exact place and exact hour. Her thoughts raced through every possibility until one realization settled heavily inside her chest. The information had not been stolen from outside the palace. It had come from someone trusted enough to access the king's private movements. As Ethan unfolded the letter, one of the riders quietly exchanged a glance with another. It lasted less than a second, but Amelia noticed it immediately. She had spent years observing court politics, where hidden intentions often revealed themselves in the smallest expressions rather than spoken words. Without allowing herself time to hesitate, she stepped from the trees. The sudden sound of snapping branches drew every eye toward her. Ethan looked up in surprise. "Amelia?" he asked, unable to hide his confusion. She walked directly toward him without answering. Before anyone could question her, she gently reached for the letter in his hands. "Forgive me," she said softly. "Please do not read this." The nearest rider immediately objected. "That document carries urgent orders from the royal council." Amelia met his eyes only briefly before turning back to Ethan. "Your Majesty," she whispered, "something about this is wrong." Ethan frowned. "On what evidence?" Amelia wished she had a simple answer. She had no proof, only instinct. Only the uneasy certainty that had kept her alive through years of navigating dangerous ambitions inside the royal court. Ethan searched her face, waiting. She could not tell him that the schedule itself had been compromised. If she exposed that fact now, whoever had arranged this trap would disappear before the truth could ever be uncovered. Every hidden conspirator inside the palace would simply erase the evidence and begin again. She lowered her voice until only Ethan could hear. "Please trust me this one time." Before he could respond, the lead messenger suddenly urged his horse backward, his calm expression breaking for the first time. The movement was small, but it confirmed every fear growing inside Amelia's heart. Someone had expected Ethan to ignore all warnings. Someone had expected everything to unfold exactly according to plan. Amelia slowly stepped between Ethan and the riders, forcing herself to become the obstacle no one had anticipated. In that single moment, she understood the impossible choice standing before her. She could reveal everything she suspected without proof and watch the real traitor vanish forever, or she could remain silent, protect the investigation, and allow the blame to one day fall upon herself. As the evening wind stirred the trees above them, Amelia quietly accepted the heavier burden, never imagining that her decision would eventually cost her the trust of the only man she had ever loved. The days that followed changed everything, although almost no one realized it at the time. Amelia returned to Blackwood Castle with Ethan riding only a few yards behind her, yet an invisible wall had already begun to rise between them. She never mentioned the strange riders again. She never explained why she had interrupted the meeting or why she had insisted that the letter should never be opened. Instead, she quietly resumed her duties as though nothing unusual had happened. That silence became exactly what someone inside the palace had been waiting for. Within a week, anonymous reports began appearing on the desks of the royal council. Small details from the king's private schedule had somehow reached outsiders. Secret supply routes had been discovered. Meetings intended to remain confidential were suddenly anticipated before they even took place. None of the information was damaging enough to start a war, but together they painted a troubling picture. Someone close to Ethan was sharing royal secrets. Every report pointed in only one direction: Amelia. Ethan refused to believe it at first. He ordered every accusation to be verified before reaching his ears. He remembered the kindness she had shown countless strangers, the quiet compassion that had earned the love of ordinary families across the kingdom, and the gentle certainty in her eyes beneath those ancient oak trees. None of it matched the image of a traitor. Yet every investigation seemed to uncover another coincidence that placed Amelia at the center of the mystery. She had organized the king's travel plans. She had been present before each unexpected leak. She had persuaded him not to read the mysterious letter before it mysteriously disappeared from the royal archives. Unknown to Ethan, Amelia had burned the document herself only hours after returning to the castle. Hidden inside its elegant handwriting was a coded symbol she recognized from years earlier, a mark belonging to a secret circle that had quietly influenced noble families across several kingdoms. Destroying the letter protected the only clue that could eventually expose the organization, but to anyone else it looked exactly like someone eliminating evidence. She accepted that appearance without protest. Every evening, after the castle settled into silence, Amelia slipped through forgotten service corridors carrying nothing more than a hooded lantern and a worn leather journal. She secretly visited villages surrounding the capital, speaking with merchants, blacksmiths, traveling healers, and retired soldiers. She never asked direct questions. Instead, she listened. People often revealed the truth when they believed no one important cared enough to hear it. Little by little, scattered conversations formed a pattern. The same unfamiliar crest appeared on imported goods. The same wealthy patron quietly funded isolated estates near the eastern border. The same polished carriage visited noble houses only after sunset. Amelia carefully recorded every detail, never realizing that someone else had already begun watching her movements. From the highest balcony overlooking the castle gardens, Lord Victor Ashcroft, Ethan's most trusted royal advisor, observed her disappear through the western gate once again. His pleasant smile never reached his pale eyes. Standing beside him, a young court official asked quietly, "Should we continue following her?" Victor folded his hands behind his back and calmly looked toward the darkening horizon. "No," he answered with effortless confidence. "The more she searches, the more suspicious she becomes." The official hesitated. "And if she discovers something?" Victor's smile widened almost imperceptibly. "She already has. She simply does not know she is following the path I prepared for her." Far below, Amelia continued riding toward another quiet village, believing every clue brought her closer to protecting Ethan. She never imagined that every step she took was also carrying her exactly where the real architect of the conspiracy wanted her to go. Winter settled over the northern kingdom with quiet determination, covering the forests in silver frost while the distance between Ethan and Amelia grew colder than the season itself. Every council meeting seemed to end with another troubling report, another missing document, another witness claiming they had seen Amelia leaving the castle after dark. Ethan listened carefully to every accusation, but something deep inside him refused to let go of the woman he thought he knew. The stories fit together almost too perfectly, and that perfection disturbed him more than any rumor ever could. One evening, after dismissing the royal council, Ethan remained alone inside the ancient library where generations of kings had recorded the history of Blackwood. As snow drifted beyond the tall, stained glass windows, he quietly spread dozens of investigation reports across the massive oak table. He read every statement again, searching not for proof of Amelia's guilt, but for something everyone else had overlooked. Hours passed before a single detail caught his attention. 3 witnesses had each claimed to see Amelia leaving the western gate on the same evening, yet every statement described different weather conditions. One insisted heavy rain had fallen. Another remembered bright moonlight. The third described thick morning fog. They could not all be telling the truth. Ethan leaned back slowly. For the first time, certainty gave way to doubt. The next morning he summoned Captain Daniel Brooks, commander of the Royal Guard, and one of the few people whose loyalty had never been questioned. Daniel had served Ethan's family for more than 20 years and possessed a calm honesty that made exaggeration impossible. Ethan handed him the reports without speaking. Daniel studied them carefully before looking up. "Someone wanted these stories to sound convincing," he said quietly. "Instead, they sound rehearsed." Ethan nodded. "Find every witness again. Speak to them separately. Tell no one why." Daniel bowed and departed before sunrise. Over the following days, answers arrived one by one, and each answer created even greater questions. A stable hand admitted he had been paid to repeat a story he had never witnessed. A merchant confessed that he had signed a written statement without reading it because a respected noble promised it would help the kingdom. Another witness had vanished completely, leaving behind an empty cottage and a table still set for breakfast. None of it resembled the careful truth Ethan expected from a legitimate investigation. Meanwhile, Amelia continued her quiet search beyond the castle walls, unaware that Ethan had begun retracing the same path from the opposite direction. In a peaceful mountain village nearly 60 miles from the capital, she met an elderly widow named Eleanor Whitmore who recognized the strange crest Amelia carried inside her journal. The old woman disappeared into her farmhouse and returned carrying a faded wooden box wrapped in linen. Inside rested several letters written more than 20 years earlier. Each page bore the identical hidden symbol Amelia had seen on the destroyed message in the forest. Eleanor lowered her voice. "My husband once served the royal council. Before he passed away, he warned me that if this mark ever returned, it would not come from enemies outside the kingdom. It would come from men already welcomed inside its walls." Amelia's heart grew heavy as she carefully folded the letters back into the box. The conspiracy she feared was older than she had imagined. It had survived kings, winters, and generations of trusted advisors. As she prepared to leave, Eleanor gently touched her hand. "Be careful, child," she whispered. "People who hide behind loyalty are always the hardest to recognize." Miles away inside Blackwood Castle, Ethan stood alone on the highest balcony watching fresh snow cover the kingdom he had sworn to protect. For the first time since Amelia's arrest, one impossible thought refused to leave his mind. If she had truly betrayed him, why did every answer seem to make her look less guilty instead of more innocent? Ethan left the castle before dawn, with only Captain Daniel Brooks riding beside him, telling no one where they were going. The fresh snow muffled the sound of their horses as they followed the winding mountain road toward Eleanor Whitmore's isolated farmhouse. Daniel had quietly traced Amelia's recent travels, expecting to discover another secret meeting with conspirators. Instead, every person he questioned described the same woman. They spoke of an Omega who delivered medicine without asking for payment, repaired broken fences, comforted frightened children, and listened far more than she spoke. No one believed she was capable of betraying anyone. Ethan listened in silence, each story placing another crack in the judgment he had once believed unquestionable. By late afternoon, they reached Eleanor's home, where smoke curled peacefully from the stone chimney. The elderly widow welcomed them with cautious kindness, though surprise briefly crossed her face when she recognized the Alpha King himself standing at her door. Without hesitation, Ethan asked the only question that truly mattered. "Did Amelia Carter come here?" Eleanor nodded slowly and disappeared into the back room. When she returned, she carried the same weathered wooden box Amelia had examined only days before. She placed it gently upon the table. "She asked for nothing," Eleanor said quietly. "She only wanted the truth." Ethan carefully opened the box. Inside rested brittle letters, faded sketches, and a small leather journal, whose pages had yellowed with age. As he turned them one by one, the hidden symbol Amelia had described appeared again and again beside the signatures of respected nobles who had served generations of Blackwood rulers. Daniel leaned closer. "This organization has existed for decades," he whispered. Ethan continued reading until a folded page slipped free and drifted onto the floor. It was newer than the others, its ink still dark despite months of travel. Across the top, written in Amelia's familiar handwriting, were the words, "If you are reading this, then I have already failed to protect you in silence." Ethan's hands trembled almost imperceptibly as he unfolded the letter. Amelia had never intended anyone else to find it. She explained how she had recognized the coded seal on the message delivered in the forest months earlier. She admitted destroying the letter herself because revealing the symbol too soon would have warned the hidden network that someone inside the palace understood their language. She apologized for allowing suspicion to fall upon her, writing that she could not risk losing the only chance to expose those responsible. Near the bottom of the page, she had written one final sentence. "I would rather lose your trust than lose your life." The room became impossibly quiet. Ethan stared at the words until they blurred before his eyes. Every unanswered question suddenly found its place. Amelia had not been hiding her betrayal. She had been hiding her protection. Daniel slowly reached into the wooden box once more and removed a small silver ring wrapped inside a linen cloth. Ethan recognized it immediately. Months earlier, during the journey through the eastern forest, he had believed he misplaced the signet ring while resting beneath the old oak tree. Amelia had secretly recovered it before any stranger could discover his true identity. Attached to the ring was a tiny dried wildflower pressed carefully beneath clear wax. Ethan remembered that flower. It had been growing beside the tree where she first offered him water and bread. She had kept both as quiet reminders of the day she chose to protect him without expecting recognition. Ethan closed his eyes as regret settled heavily upon his heart. He finally understood why she had accepted exile without defending herself. She had never been protecting her own name. She had been protecting his kingdom. Outside, the winter wind swept gently across the snow-covered hills, but for Ethan Blackwood the coldest truth was no longer waiting beyond the castle walls. It had been living inside his own judgment all along. The ride back to Blackwood Castle felt longer than any journey Ethan had ever taken. Every mile carried the weight of another memory he had misunderstood, another moment when Amelia had chosen silence instead of defending herself. By the time the castle towers appeared against the pale winter sky, his purpose had changed completely. This was no longer about proving her innocence. It was about stopping the people who had manipulated both his kingdom and his heart. Ethan called an emergency council before sunset. The great hall filled quickly as nobles, commanders, and advisors gathered beneath the royal banners. Lord Victor Ashcroft stood near the front with the same composed smile he had worn for years, offering respectful greetings to every official who entered. Nothing in his calm expression suggested the storm quietly forming around him. Ethan took his place before the throne but did not sit. Instead, he placed Amelia's leather journal upon the council table where every eye could see it. A low murmur spread through the room. Victor's gaze lingered on the journal for only a heartbeat before returning to the king. "Your Majesty," he said smoothly, "has new evidence concerning the former Omega finally been discovered?" Ethan looked directly at him. "Yes," he answered. "More than I expected." The chamber fell silent. Ethan began asking simple questions rather than making accusations. He asked who first reported Amelia's supposed betrayal. He asked who organized the witness statements. He asked who approved the investigations that had condemned her. Every answer quietly pointed toward the same office, the office of the royal advisor. Victor responded to every question with practiced confidence, explaining procedures, delegating responsibility, and reminding everyone that each decision had been made for the safety of the kingdom. His explanations sounded flawless, almost too flawless. Captain Daniel Brooks then stepped forward carrying a stack of freshly collected statements. Unlike the originals, these had been given privately without pressure from noble influence. Several witnesses admitted they had repeated stories prepared by others. One confessed that the wording of his testimony had been written before he ever arrived at the palace. Another identified a servant who had delivered sealed instructions bearing Victor's personal crest. The murmurs inside the hall grew louder. Victor remained outwardly calm, though a faint shadow crossed his expression for the first time. Ethan carefully removed one final piece of evidence from his coat. It was the silver signet ring Amelia had protected in the forest. Beside it rested her handwritten letter. He did not read the entire page aloud. Instead, he spoke only one sentence. "She wrote that she would rather lose my trust than lose my life." No one spoke. Even the oldest council elders lowered their eyes. Ethan slowly turned toward Victor. "Tell me," he asked quietly, "why would a traitor choose exile instead of revealing the names of those truly responsible?" Victor hesitated. It lasted only a moment, but Ethan saw it clearly. Confidence had finally given way to uncertainty. Before the advisor could answer, a young palace messenger rushed into the chamber, breathing heavily from the climb up the castle stairs. He bowed quickly before the throne. "Your Majesty," he said, struggling to catch his breath, "our Eastern Border Watch has sent urgent word. A group using false royal documents attempted to enter Blackwood territory this morning. They carried the same hidden crest found in the recovered letters." Every face turned toward Victor. His polite smile disappeared completely. Ethan understood everything at once. The conspiracy had never ended. It had simply continued while everyone focused their suspicion on the one person trying to stop it. Without another word, Ethan closed Amelia's journal and looked toward the snow-covered mountains beyond the great windows. Somewhere beyond those distant forests, she was still alone, still believing the kingdom considered her its greatest enemy, while the people she had tried to expose were already preparing their next move. This time, however, Ethan intended to reach the truth before it reached her. Snow fell gently across the capital as though the kingdom itself wished to bury the mistakes of the past beneath a quiet blanket of white. Ethan did not wait for another council meeting or another investigation. Before sunrise, he left Blackwood Castle accompanied only by Captain Daniel Brooks, following the narrow mountain roads toward the small valley where Amelia had built a new life after her exile. Along the journey, they passed villages that greeted her name with warmth instead of suspicion. Children proudly pointed toward repaired cottages she had helped restore. Elderly couples spoke of medicine she had delivered during the harshest weeks of winter. Farmers smiled as they described the quiet woman who always arrived before dawn to help clear frozen wells before disappearing again without asking for payment or praise. Every story struck Ethan harder than the one before it. The kingdom had called her a traitor, yet strangers remembered her only for kindness. By late afternoon, they reached a modest wooden cottage nestled beside a winding creek. Smoke drifted lazily from the stone chimney, and colorful bird feeders hung beneath the snow-covered branches surrounding the small home. Ethan stepped down from his horse slowly, suddenly uncertain of himself for the first time in years. The great Alpha King, who had faced rival rulers without hesitation, found his hands trembling as he approached a simple front door. Before he could knock, the door opened. Amelia stood there wrapped in a warm, cream-colored sweater beneath her familiar gray cloak. For several heartbeats, neither of them spoke. Time seemed to pause between them, carrying every misunderstanding, every unanswered question, and every silent sacrifice that had separated their lives. Amelia finally offered the same gentle smile Ethan remembered from the forest months before. It was smaller now, touched by sadness, but it had not disappeared. "You found the letters," she said quietly. Ethan nodded once. "I found the truth." She lowered her eyes, almost as though she had expected this moment to come someday. "Then the kingdom is finally safe." Those simple words shattered the last piece of pride Ethan had been carrying. She did not ask whether her name had been cleared. She did not ask whether the accusations had been withdrawn. She cared only about the people she had protected, including the man who had condemned her. Ethan stepped forward until only a few feet separated them. Then, without caring that Daniel stood nearby or that villagers had begun quietly gathering along the road, he slowly lowered himself onto one knee. Gasps spread through the small crowd. No one in living memory had ever seen an Alpha King kneel before another person. Ethan lifted his eyes to meet Amelia's. They were filled not with royal authority, but with sincere regret. "I judged your silence instead of your heart," he said softly. "I believed carefully arranged lies before I believed the woman who had never given me a reason to doubt her. I called you something you never were, while you carried the burden of protecting me without asking for anything in return. I cannot erase the pain I caused. I cannot return the months you lost because of my failure. But I can stand before every citizen in this kingdom and speak the truth that should have been spoken from the beginning." Amelia felt tears gathering in her eyes, yet they were not tears of anger. They came from finally hearing the words she had never expected to receive. Ethan gently extended his hand toward her. "I did not come here to command you home," he continued. "I came to ask whether one day you might choose to forgive a man who is still learning what true strength really looks like." Amelia looked at his outstretched hand, then toward the peaceful valley surrounding her new home. After a long silence, she placed her hand gently in his. "Trust," she whispered, "is not rebuilt in a single day." Ethan nodded with quiet humility. "Then I will spend every day proving that it can be rebuilt." Above them, the winter clouds slowly parted, allowing warm afternoon sunlight to fall across the valley as though even the sky had been waiting for the truth to finally find its way home. Spring arrived quietly across the northern kingdom, replacing snow with fields of wildflowers that stretched beneath endless blue skies. Weeks had passed since Ethan knelt before Amelia's cottage, and true to his promise, he never asked for instant forgiveness. Instead, he earned each step forward through quiet actions rather than grand speeches. He visited villages once ignored by the royal court, restored unfair taxes that had burdened struggling families, and established a council where ordinary citizens could speak directly to the crown. Every reform carried the same lesson he had learned too late. A kingdom could not be protected by strength alone. It also required compassion. Amelia watched those changes from a distance before finally agreeing to return to Blackwood Castle, not as someone seeking a title, but as a woman determined to help build a better future for everyone who had once felt invisible. The day she crossed the castle gates again, the atmosphere was nothing like the day she had left. Instead of suspicious whispers, people stood quietly along the stone pathways with lowered heads. Bakers, blacksmiths, teachers, soldiers, and children waited simply to welcome her home. Many offered handwritten notes, thanking her for kindness she had shown them long before anyone knew her story. Amelia accepted every smile with gentle humility, reminding each person that hope belonged to all of them now. A few days later, Ethan gathered the entire kingdom once more inside the Great Hall of Blackwood. The chamber looked exactly as it had on the day Amelia had been condemned, yet everything felt different. Standing before the throne, Ethan removed his royal crown, and placed it upon the council table before speaking. His voice echoed clearly through the silent hall. Months ago, I stood here and accused an innocent woman because I allowed fear to speak louder than trust. Today I stand before you to correct that injustice. He told the kingdom everything. He explained how Amelia had protected him in secret, how she had carried suspicion to expose a hidden conspiracy, and how she had accepted exile rather than place innocent lives at greater risk. When he finished, no applause followed. Only respectful silence filled the hall as every person reflected on how easily appearances had hidden the truth. Ethan then walked toward Amelia, who stood quietly beneath the sunlight streaming through the tall, stained glass windows. This time he did not kneel because he had already offered his apology. Instead, he simply extended his hand with quiet hope. Amelia smiled softly before taking it. The bond between them did not return because of destiny alone. It returned because both of them freely chose honesty over pride, patience over resentment, and trust over fear. The elders stepped forward and formally recognized Amelia as the rightful Luna of Blackwood, but she accepted the title with one condition. "If I become Luna," she said gently, "let every Omega, every child, every family, and every forgotten soul know they will always have a voice inside this kingdom." The hall erupted with heartfelt applause, not for a queen crowned by tradition, but for a woman whose courage had transformed an entire nation. Later that evening, Ethan and Amelia stood together on the castle balcony overlooking thousands of glowing lanterns floating into the warm spring sky. Ethan glanced toward her with a grateful smile. "You saved my life more than once," he said quietly. Amelia looked across the peaceful kingdom they had both sacrificed so much to protect. "Perhaps," she answered, "but the greatest victory was helping us remember that mercy is never weakness." The lanterns drifted higher until they became tiny stars against the evening sky, carrying with them a story that would be remembered for generations, not because an Alpha King found the truth, but because one rejected Omega never stopped choosing kindness even when the world chose to misunderstand her. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts, like, share, subscribe, enable notifications, and join us for more unforgettable alpha romance stories ahead.